Welcome to those who are joining us on Zoom. We're making a couple of technical adjustments. Just be with you in a few minutes. For those of you on Zoom, while we're making some final adjustments, if you can just look for the QA button on the bottom or top of your Zoom screen. Should you have questions that you want to ask Mark after he's finished his program today, that's where to enter them. And we hope to have a few minutes at the end of this presentation / performance to answer all the questions. Hello to those of you at home. You're seeing strange things happening on your screens. That is not your computer, so don't worry. We're just making some final adjustments, and we should be started any minute now. To those of you joining us on Zoom, we'll be started probably just a couple of minutes after 3 o'clock, so get comfortable. The whole program should run until about 4:30 today. If you want to ask questions towards the end of the program, the way to do that is look for the Q&A button either right above or right below your Zoom screen, and you can type in a question there, and we hope to get to any questions after Mark has finished his formal remarks and wonderful playing today. Good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. We should get started in about 2 minutes. Good afternoon and welcome both live at the Hingham Heritage Museum and to our wonderful audience on Zoom today. If you haven't already done so, those of you at home, check your audio because we're going to have some beautiful, not just speaking, but beautiful music today. Hopefully you can hear me and then your audio settings are probably fine. And also check your QA button if you want to ask more questions. We will ask them at the end, but you can enter them at any time during the program. The Q&A button is usually the top or the bottom of your Zoom screen. My name is Eileen McIntyre, and it's my privilege to serve on the board of the Hingham Historical Society, as well as chairing our hardworking education committee, which is bringing this program, the 5th program in our Out of the Box series, to you today. Our program, our entire series, is inspired by items that are in the archives and collections of the Hingham Historical Society, and today's program specifically is inspired by 2 beautiful pianos in our collection. Before we begin, I want everyone to know the program is being recorded. And before I introduce our wonderful presenter and performer today, Deirdre Anderson will say a few words.
Hi, everybody. Deirdre Anderson. I serve as the Executive Director of the Hingham Historical Society. We'd like to welcome you here to our 5th Out of the Box lecture, and I give my thanks to our performers and our facilitators who helped bring this program together. As you can see, for those of you who have spent some time in this room before, it looks a little bit different. We had a very exciting week moving pianos. It can be done with a lot of help. And our work was enlightened by piano practice. So it was a lovely week to be at the Hingham Historical Society. But I just wanted to share with you some programming notes. Next month's Out of the Box lecture will be on Sunday, April 10th. This is the Nancy Tiffin Memorial Lecture, and the Tiffin family will be joining us. And we invite you all to join us on April 10th. We will have an amazing presentation by Marie Schlag, who is a textile conservator and who has volunteered her time with us for the last 18 to 24 months, inventorying every piece in our textile collection. So we're calling it the Main Street Runway, and we hope you can join us and join us afterwards to greet the Tiffin family and share remembrances you have of Nancy Tiffin, who served this organization so faithfully for so many years. And then keep abreast of your monthly e-newsletters from the Historical Society. We have a busy, busy spring planned, which is very exciting as the world reopens. And what a perfect, perfect day for music to soothe the soul and to listen. So thank you all, and I'll turn it back to Eileen.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. So I'm going to introduce our performer and presenter today. Pianist Mark Goodman received his bachelor's degree from Oberlin Conservatory and his master's from New England Conservatory, both in piano performance. Mark has performed throughout New England and the US, both as a soloist and a chamber musician. As a founding member of Music from the Yellow Barn, he has appeared at Boston's Jordan Hall, Princeton University, and on public radio. A sought-after collaborative pianist, Mark has appeared recently with several local ensembles, including the Unicorn Singers, the Hingham Woodwind Quintet, and the Hingham High School Chorus. He has served on the faculties of the Longy School of Music, Quincy College, and the Chamber Music Center at Wellesley College. Formerly the chair of the piano department at South Shore Conservatory, Mark has taught at the conservatory, where he runs the adult workshop and the recital program since 1981. A Hingham resident for many years, Mark now lives in Hull with his wife, pianist Jennifer Cope Goodman, who will be turning pages for Mark this afternoon. Welcome, Mark, and thank you, Jennifer. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Irene. I was flattered when Irene asked me to do this lecture because I am not a historian or a musicologist, and I honestly had never played a square piano before. So I've learned a lot along the way about the instrument and its history, in addition to the music. I've chosen a program that is all music written in America from 1794 until about 1824. And it was eye-opening to me because a lot of this music is really deserves to be heard and is an untapped part of the repertoire. So I'll be talking first about the square piano, which is in the Society's collection. The square piano is a prototype of today's modern piano. And I guess, people say Cristofori was the person who invented the piano with a mechanism with hammers that hit the strings, as opposed to the harpsichord where strings are plucked. So this innovation made players able to actually control the sound with dynamics that could rise and fall within a phrase, like something like that. Whereas the harpsichord, you hit the key and what you get is what you get. So the square piano was developed probably around 1760 in England. And they were immediately extremely popular. And for about 25 years, they existed side by side with the harpsichord in people's homes. The square piano was appealing because it was relatively inexpensive compared to the harpsichord. You could get a square piano for about half the price of a single manual harpsichord. And also, because of their size, they could fit easily into the home and could be used, they're almost like a tabletop, and they're sometimes called table pianos. So at the time, music making was very much domestic. People had pianos in their homes, and in England, almost every household, at least from the middle to upper class, had some kind of keyboard instrument. So the way the square piano is set up is the strings run horizontally within the case, and the keyboard is on this side, and the soundboard is on this side. So that's where the sound comes from. So they caught on very quickly, and imports to the US started around the 1770s. At that point, I think only well-to-do households had them. Apparently, Thomas Jefferson had one in 1771. And it took a while for them to catch on, because they were imported, obviously. But in England, they were basically wildly popular. And it was a craze which really caught on very quickly. In London, apparently a piano salesman named John Zumpe, he had a shop in Hanover Street in London, and he sold these by the hundreds. And there were several people There were several different manufacturers. The one I'm playing is actually by Broadwood, which was an English company. So the Hingham, the Society Square piano, which I'm actually not using today because it's out of commission and in the shop. But that one was manufactured in 1793. It was, the maker was John Henry Houston of Houston Company. And the example that is housed here is one of only 10 surviving pianos. It's actually fairly rare compared to a lot of the other makes. And this was most likely the first piano to ever appear in Hingham. It was imported by for Rachel Lincoln in 1794, and I think probably a lot of you who are familiar with the society here know who Rachel Lincoln is, and it'll be at Lincoln Day. But she was the daughter of Nathan and Martha Deering Lincoln, and when she owned it, it was passed down to various family members for 150 years. So it kept changing hands within their family. And finally, it made its way to the Bouvet family. It was gifted to the Hingham Historical Society in 1949 by a woman, Mrs. Charleston Chickering, who was the sister of Charlotte Bouvet. I'm actually not sure whether the Chickering is the same as the piano manufacturing company, but that sounds likely. Anyway, once she had it, it was housed in the Old Ordinary until 1966. And at that point, it was restored in 2019 by a man named Michael Sponson. So the one I'm playing today is on loan from Dale Munchie, who is here. He's a restorer of antique instruments. He has quite a collection. I've been to his house, and you can see forte pianos, a couple of these, modern pianos, harpsichords. It's quite a sight, actually. And I would say any technical questions beyond what I've said, you should probably refer to him, because he said he would be willing to answer some questions, because I know basically how it works, but he knows a lot more. A couple of features of this instrument is 5 octaves. So you'll see it's not nearly the span of register of this piano. And you might also notice there are no pedals. So there's no sustaining pedal, which, as most of you probably have a slight knowledge of pianos, but this is what you do. That's with the sustain pedal down. And that is not a part of this instrument. Some of the later ones had primitive sustain powers, and sometimes they were like a large flat piece of wood underneath, and I think sometimes even like a hand mechanism that you could use to make the notes sustain like that. And it wasn't nearly as resonant as the piano that I just showed you. In Beethoven, sometimes you can find passages where the pedal is indicated to be down through entire lines of music. And even actually one of the pieces I'm playing today, it's indicated with pedal. So what I'm going to be doing is starting with a couple of pieces that are pre-1800 and moving forward in time to the point where the later pieces I'm going to play are not popular in terms of register and when the composer is asking for sustain pedal. So you'll see the kind of progression that the music made. Let me see a little more about this one. This is, as I said, made by Broadwood. The action is what's called a single action, and with a primitive escapement mechanism. When you play a note on this piano, the hammer will come up, hit the string, and quickly come back. This piano does not have that feature. So the action isn't, it's responsive and very light, but it doesn't have that escapement, which makes it the modern piano more responsive and quick. So these pianos, as I said, they were imported to the the US around probably the 1870s. But by 1810, and some of the music I play will be, going into that period, they had become a fixture in almost every American home. The Philadelphia Mirror published an article which said almost every home included, between the Delaware and Schuylkill has its own piano or harpsichord. So it was basically part of a well-to-do household. It was also considered kind of a courtship instrument. Young women were expected to learn how to play and have some keyboard knowledge, and this was considered a plus in terms of winning a husband. And the piano in domestic music making is a very social activity, and I know this through my life with Jennifer, because we sit at the piano sometimes and play duets, and this is a practice which has been going on, since early on 1800s, even before that. So the music that I will play first is almost more a little geared towards the amateur music maker, but as time went on and the piano developed, it became too advanced for amateurs and is geared more towards the professional, and the advance of the music also dictated the development of the piano. It's hard to know which came first, actually. But so that's a little background. I'm going to start getting to the music. Oh, so more like this? Yeah, I wasn't sure about that, actually. Okay, sure. As I said, I've chosen a program of American music, but the composers who you're going to hear none were born in America. The influx of American composers started to come around probably 1860, something like that. So these composers lived first in Europe, England, Ireland, France, and came to America during the time of like the 1870s, 1880s, early 1900s. So when you hear their music, it's not going to sound distinctly American necessarily, because their models were Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and later on some of the Romantic composers. But the first piece I'm playing, though, is somewhat American because it's variations on Yankee Doodle, which was a tune originating in England, and then it became kind of the song for the American, during the Revolution period. So this is actually by an anonymous composer. We're not really sure who wrote it. And it was this theme for variations was not necessarily as popular as you might think it would be. But there are a few examples of it. The composers that I'm going to play, they wrote rondos, variations, sonatas. But one thing which is kind of cute is they had kind of charming titles, such as like one of the ones I'm playing is Peter Moran's favorite variations on the Suabian air. And they often say that, on the celebrated theme of the Swiss waltz and things like that. So it's kind of cute, but so here, Yankee Doodle, as I said, is anonymous, but you'll know the theme. This was printed in Philadelphia in 1822. So a couple of features to notice are there's a kind of, in this second strain of the tune, there's a kind of archaic harmonization, which might sound a little funny, but it was in the original one. And there's also halfway through the piece, you'll hear a minor key variation, which isn't really even based on the theme, but it's always was, I think, customary to put a minor key variation in the sets of that time. So here's Yankee Doodle on the square piano. next piece is by a composer named Raynor Taylor. It's his Rondo in G, which was written in 1794. His dates were 1747 to 1825. He was born in England, and when there, he was the director of the Sadler Wells Theatre in London. But he arrived in Baltimore in 1792 and moved to Philadelphia, where he was the organist for the St. Peter's Church. He was the founder of the Philadelphia Musical Fund Society, which helped needy musicians, and that still exists today. So his rondo was inspired by Mozart's famous K545, the theme of the rondo for that. And so his theme also implies imitation, and it's a very playful piece. You'll hear it's almost like the two hands are playing cat and mouse, following each other. And that use of imitation was unusual at that time for the American composers. Another feature of this piece is in between the various appearances of the theme, there are little cadenzas. And as the piece goes on, they get more and more elaborate. So it's very pianistic in that way. So this is Rondo in G by Raynor Taylor. next I'll be playing a piece by Alexander Renagel. He was grew up in England, was born in England, and actually studied with the composer you just heard, Raynor Taylor. He came to America in 1786, and he moved to Philadelphia, where he became an important musical figure and exerted a lot of influence on the whole Philadelphia music scene. He founded the Chestnut Street Theater, which I believe still exists, and he wrote the most ambitious piano sonatas to that date at the time. Whereas in the previous piece, you heard the influence of Mozart a little bit in the way the theme was set up and the way the rondo progressed. Here, you're going to see a strong influence of Haydn. In the first movement has that kind of expansive, unfolding feel that Haydn sonatas do. And the last movement is, well, actually, it's not, it's just a two-movement piece. But the rondo that follows is very exuberant and spirited. It has a striking feature of, it's in 6/8 time, but it suddenly shifts gears and goes into duple time, 2/4, and back and forth between the two. This is Renagel's sonata in D. It's actually the first of 4 sonatas he wrote in Philadelphia, and I think it's known sometimes as one of the Philadelphia sonatas. how it feels to play this. And there's a whoops, sorry. It was just suggested by Jennifer, a fellow pianist, to tell you what it feels like to play this music on this instrument. And it's basically like that old expression, walking on eggshells. It's, the keys, especially for somebody who's used to a traditional piano, the keys are small, they're very responsive, they're very light, and one false move is just like, so, anyway. So the next piece I'm going to play is by a composer named Peter Moran. He came to New York from Dublin in 1817. I'm going to play Moran's favorite variations to the Swabian air. It was written for piano or harp, actually. So it's a set of variations based on the tune Ach du lieber Augustin, which is how it's well known nowadays, I guess. So this one, I was a little on the fence about which instrument to try, because this one kind of borders what's possible on a square piano and what goes beyond the needs. So I'm going to actually play you the beginning of this on the square piano to the point kind of where it was practical. And then I'm going to switch to the Mason Hamlin here to really complete the piece. So when I first tried this piece, it started out fine on the square, but then about halfway through, I got into trouble. The range was beyond where the square piano goes, and the composer calls for pedal, sustain pedal, because as I said, this was 17. So I'll give you a little demo of the comparison between the two instruments. That's all. But later on, the piece gets to a final section where the notes are up here, and he asks for pedal to sustain a chord like this. I can't play the G there because it's not there. Arpeggios, and this piece, I think, sounds a lot more like Beethoven than Haydn. He has these kind of intense, dramatic, dynamic shifts, like and as I said, a kind of cadenza-like passage towards the end where it really goes beyond the capabilities of the square piano. I've read that the people who played these often had to make adjustments in the music that was published, so their household instruments could accommodate what was out there, but at a certain point, I think it became too difficult. But the square piano itself also developed in time. This is a pretty early one, but they later became, they were built, started to be built with metal frames. This one is rosewood and mahogany, I believe. Had metal frames, and they were actually called the square grand piano. So, and they also had pedals. So this is, we said before, a fairly early example of one, but these pianos did kind of get to a point where, again, what we started to call the forte piano is something which you could play Schubert and Beethoven on. So anyway, so now I'm going to play the entire set of these variations on the Mason Hamlin. You might also notice that the pitch is different. Yeah, this piano is tuned to a lower pitch, and this is tuned to the conventional A440, I think. Yeah, but if you listen to this, they're not the same chord. This is, Dale, how low is this one, would you say? Whole tone low, yeah.
C sounds like modern flat. On the road, we play middle C.
It's going to sound like B flat on the Mason Hamlin.
Right. The last piece I'm doing jumps forward in time a little bit to 1824. This piece is by Charles Thibault. He's French. He was born in France and came to New York in the teens of the 1800s. Time for recess. This piece. So he concertized in New York from the 1818 to 1830s and published music until 1850. He was trained at the Paris Conservatoire, and his music reflects this. It's very, very well written, and he's probably the best American composer, not native born, but resident American composer working during the 1850s. This piece is very well crafted, and I think really deserves a place in the repertoire. It's a rondo, and it's called Le Dieu, and you'll see some resemblances to Beethoven in this. The opening is an opening prelude, which is very reminiscent of Moonlight Sonata with the triplets that you'll hear. And Beethoven wrote his own sonata called Les Adieux, which some of you might know, and that also ends. The finale of that is a very spirited 6/8 rondo type of piece. So there are some real influences, but the piano writing and the pianism in this is well in advance of Beethoven and Haydn. It looks much more towards Mendelssohn and the Romantic period, I think. So here is Le Dieu.
This is speaking, yeah, this is,
A rondo is a musical form that was often used for the final movement of a sonata. It basically sets out a theme, like the one you heard in this piece, this. That was the rondo theme. And it's interspersed with various episodes that come throughout the piece. And the rondo theme after each episode returns again. So it can be a form of like A, B, A, C, A, D, A, something like that. As I said, they're often used as finales for sonatas and even symphonies, but they can also stand on their own, and sometimes, or as in this case, this is just a rondo that is written to stand on its own. Sure. Okay.
there was a question on Zoom, and it could be that they couldn't hear clearly in the beginning of the
Well,
program
somebody in the
about,
back has a question.
yes, Mark, one question from the Zoom audience.
Oh,
The question was, what is the difference between a harpsichord and a square piano? I think you covered that briefly at the beginning, but I know the Zoom audience couldn't hear that well in the very beginning.
okay. Well, obviously they're both keyboard instruments, and the harpsichord has strings as well, the way the square piano does. But when you depress a harpsichord key, there's something that comes up, it's called a plectrum, and it plucks the key. So it plucks it in. The player can't really control the speed at which the plectrum goes up and down. So you can get various sounds on a harpsichord by different stops, like as in an organ. But the square piano then has a different mechanism where a hammer comes up and hits the key, which is the same as what happens here. And depending on the speed with which the hammer hits the key, like if you play gently, you'll get a quiet sound, but if you play to produce more rapid hits, you can control the sound. So as I said, you can make variations in the sound, and that opened up a whole new world of expression.
So there was a question back there, and I'll repeat the question for the Zoom audience.
I have never heard of the square piano before. Piano forte, heard the development of that.
So
Is there another one that comes after that?
the question was about the development from the square piano. Was there then a development to the forte piano and then on from there?
Well,
So
she said piano forte, but actually you're correct, because the forte piano, which literally just means loud, soft, was an outgrowth of the square piano because of that ability to create a different sound depending on how you hit the key. So the forte piano came basically as a development of the square piano, and then that got shortened to piano forte, and now we just call it the piano. And as time went through the 19th century, it got larger and larger, and they were built heavy metal frames, and bigger register of keys. So, by the 1850s, composers like Liszt could, write whatever they wanted to. And even the pianos from that time, I think, would probably sound not quite as strong as the ones that are manufactured today. Yeah. So it's all an evolution. Yeah.
So was it composers that drove the piano to grow larger?
Mark, if you could repeat the question just for the Zoom audience.
Was it the composers writing the music they did that drove the piano to become larger? And that's a tough question, because it's like the chicken and the egg question. It's like the demands of the composers, they wanted more from the instruments, and the instrument makers, continued to develop the instruments. As I said, the early the square pianos, this one has a wooden frame, but later on they developed metal frames, and the sound got more, the sonority got bigger. A composer like Beethoven was writing music that was actually almost visionary, because he composed on a broadwood, but it was a later one than this. But even people, say now Beethoven's, what he got from a piano was more than the piano could even give at the time, but he just somehow looked forward, to a instrument of the future almost. Dale, do you have anything to add to that? Was it the composers or the instrument that drove each other?
Dale, you want to come up and use the microphone? Uh, Dale is the owner of this beautiful instrument and many, many other antique instruments, and is an expert on what they can do and how to tune them and make them sound wonderful. And I don't have your full bio because I wasn't expecting to introduce you today. So tell us more as you answer the question.
Good afternoon. That's a very interesting question. I would say it's a combination of the both. Both the composers were writing more and more advanced, technologically advanced music, but it was also technology driven, primarily in metallurgy. This particular piano, which dates from 1795, is strung primarily in soft iron wire. That piano is strung in high tensile steel wire. Very, very big difference in the tone that it produces and the amount of tension on which you can put a piece of steel wire. If you try to bring this up to modern day pitch, there wouldn't be a string left in the thing. And I really don't want to do that. So I think it was driven by the abilities of the metal workers to make stronger and stronger wires, which could be then brought up to higher and higher tension, which produces more sound, which required the framing of the instruments to be braced with metal, cast iron primarily. So this piano, the Mason and Hamlet, I don't know what year this dates from, I would say sometime around the 20s. The piano as we know it today had basically evolved by around 1850 or so. And they started putting metal frames, it's called a hitch pin rail, into pianos, I would say around the 1840s or so. So there's this period of piano where it would be referred to as a forte piano. This could technically be referred to as a forte piano. We think of the Viennese grand piano with a wooden frame as a forte piano, but a good rule of thumb is any keyboard, any piano with an entirely wooden frame should be referred to as a forte piano. That's about it.
Thank you.
Well, as far as I know, the early square pianos had a kind of primitive pedal, and I think the pedal got more refined as time went on too. It sustained more, it had larger sustaining power, and as I said, Beethoven would write pieces where the pedal could be down for entire 2 lines, but it wouldn't have the same effect. It would create kind of an overall haze, but it wouldn't have the same sustaining power as modern pianos. Do you know when the first pedals were introduced?
The English were the first to put pedals on their pianos. The piano that Beethoven wrote, everything up to and including his first 18 piano sonatas, which would be Opus 31, numbers 1, 2, and 3. That piano would have had a damper system in it, but it would have been knee levers. Just under the front of the keyboard there was a lever that you lifted with your knee that raised the dampers. On the English grand piano, and I would say that the Viennese started dropping their pedals down to the floor around 1810 or so, 1810, 1812. It took the Viennese a little bit longer. Took the English a little. The English, God, I'm getting all confused now. The English already had pedals on their pianos by the 1790s. We also have an 1806 Broadwood grand piano. It's the same builder as this, and that does actually have pedals on the floor. So the English were the first to put the pedal, then the damping mechanism. So it was foot pedals. Viennese took a little while to catch on to that, but they did have damping mechanisms. And in fact, on the piano on which Beethoven wrote the so-called Moonlight Sonata, it says right on the title page, always without dampers and very soft. And you can actually pull that off on a Viennese forte piano. We have one of those at home too. It's a copy of a 1795 Walter. And you can actually play the entire first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata with the pedal lifted, the whole thing, because the tone decays much more quickly. The sound disappears much more quickly on a Viennese piano than if you tried to do that on a modern piano, you wouldn't get 3 or 4 measures in before somebody said, stop, let go of the pedal. Yes, right.
Anybody else?
Okay, let me quick check, see if there's any more questions on Zoom.
Okay. How long did I have to practice on this piano, and was it a jarring shift? I've played harpsichords before, now and then in performance and for fun, but this was quite different actually. And the action is much lighter. A harpsichord requires a certain amount of weight to get that plectrum to pluck the string actually. And as I say, you don't have to worry about the dynamic shadings. So this was, I feel like I would have liked more time on this, but at one point the instrument was out of commission. So I also had to acquire the music and learn it. So I can't really answer that exactly, except I wish I had more time. It's a very delicate instrument, Anybody else? Oh yeah.
Repeat the question.
Oh, as a pianist, Jennifer is asking about what the width of the key, the white keys here, how does it compare to that of a modern grand? And my impression is that it's narrower. And also, but I think the main difference is if you can see the 2 keyboards, the keys are much shorter here. These, are about like this, and these are about like this. And the black keys, the ebony keys, they don't come up as high. It's just, it all feels smaller. And yeah, so it's an adjustment to make actually. Yeah, I'll invite people to try it for a second if that's okay with Dale at the end of the lecture.
I can answer that one.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. On the modern piano, the octave span, in other words, from C to B, is 7½ inches. On most historical keyboard instruments, it's 6½ inches. On most historical keyboards, it's 6¼ And on some instruments, it's 6⅛. So the octave just feels much smaller than it would on a modern piano. So, yeah.
There are no more questions on Zoom. Anyone else here? Good.
I would definitely say probably yes. Definitely probably. Music making at home was a big thing during that time. They didn't have TV, for instance, and so I'm sure that people accompanied singers all the time, and even that goes back even to the days of the virginal and the harpsichord and all the instruments that were found in the home and in concert. And they dancing. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, first of all, thank you to Dale Munchie for, I'll tell you this little story. We discovered that the Rachel Lincoln piano was not currently playable, needs some work. Dale had come to tune it and realized that and offered to loan us this square piano, which is just an extraordinary thing for you to do, and got it here and is bringing it back tonight. So thank you, Dale, for making this performance possible. And thank you, Mark, not only for agreeing to spend your time with us today, but for the research you did on the early music, for the time you spent playing a square piano that you had never played before, and introducing us to the different sounds and different compositions. So thank you, Mark, very, very much. Thanks to those of you at home who tuned in for your attention. Sorry about the audio problems in the very beginning. This is the first time we had done something with music. So we're learning all the time about how to do these hybrid programs. We do hope to see you all again for our next program, which Deirdre talked to you about earlier on Sunday, April 10th. And if you don't have tickets, go to the hinghamhistorical.org website and you can hear a description or see a description of the program as well as order tickets there. We'll now end the Zoom program, but we invite our in-person audience, as Mark suggested, to come up and take a look at the square piano and take a look at how it looks inside. I think we can lift the lid up with Dale's help. And then come down to the first floor where we have some light refreshments for you. Thank you all for coming today.